Imagine being trapped on a cruise ship miles away from land, where the ocean hides more secrets than you can ever imagine. A passenger vanishes without a trace. A ship drifts into the mist, completely abandoned. A cabin appears on the map, but in reality, it should not exist. A man joins your journey, but he never checked in. And sometimes, the storm outside isn't half as terrifying as the silence inside. These are the stories that cruise lines don't want you to hear. The nightmares that unfolded in the middle of the sea, and tonight, you will hear them all. Stay with me if you dare. But before we begin, hit that subscribe button. Press the bell icon so you never miss a story. And tell us in the comments, from which country and city are you watching this video? I still remember the sound of the waves that night. They were gentle, almost hypnotic, slapping softly against the steel of the ship as if lulling everyone into a false sense of comfort. That's the thing about the ocean. It tricks you. It makes you believe you're safe, wrapped in its vast embrace, when in reality, you're completely at its mercy. She was just 24. Bright, full of energy, the kind of person who turned heads without even trying. To her family, she was the heartbeat of the trip. To strangers, she was another smiling face, another vacationer chasing sunsets and cocktails. But to me, she became something else entirely, the passenger who vanished before our eyes. The cruise had begun like any other. The port was alive with excitement, luggage wheels rattling across pavement, families snapping last-minute photos before boarding, the air filled with salt and fuel. The ship itself towered over us, a floating city lit up with glass and steel. People waved from balconies, glasses raised in celebration. Nobody, not a single one of us, suspected that one of those smiling passengers would never return to shore. The first few days were picture perfect. I'd see her laughing at dinner, hair blown wild by the ocean wind, leaning on the rail to watch the waves crash below. She was magnetic. Even if you didn't know her, you noticed her. There was something about the way she carried herself, like she was living in a moment the rest of us hadn't caught up to yet. But then came the fourth night, and everything changed. The ship's nightclub was alive, pulsing with music that shook the walls and spilled into the corridors. Lights flashed, glasses clinked, voices rose above the DJ's booming set. It was the kind of chaos that felt safe, contained, like nothing bad could possibly happen inside that bubble of neon and sound. She was there, in the center of it all. Red dress, barefoot, shoes dangling from her hand. Her smile lit up the room, her laugh cutting through the music. She danced, like the ocean itself was running through her veins. Everyone noticed her. How could they not? I watched her that night, just briefly, and that's why I can still picture it so clearly. Around midnight, she left the dance floor, still barefoot, still holding her shoes, still smiling like she knew a secret none of us did. Cameras caught her in the hallway. Just a fleeting image, but enough to confirm what we all saw. She turned toward the upper deck, alone. That's it. That's the last time anyone saw her alive. From that moment forward, she was gone. When morning came, her cabin was quiet. Too quiet. Her bed was made, her shoes neatly placed by the side, passport sitting untouched on the desk, as though she'd planned to return at any moment. But she didn't. She never did. Her family panicked. They searched every corner of the ship, the restaurants, the pool deck, the casino. Nothing. She wasn't there. Finally, they told the crew, but the response was slow, almost dismissive. Maybe she overslept. Maybe she's somewhere on board. But hours passed. No sign of her. And that's when the whispers began. Some passengers claimed they heard something during the night. A shout. Footsteps. A scream carried by the wind. Others swore they saw a shadowy figure trailing her as she left the club. But none of it appeared in the official reports. The cruise line said there was no foul play, that she must have fallen overboard. An accident. But here's the thing. Cruise ships are lined with cameras. Hundreds of them. Every hallway, every deck, every casino floor. And yet, somehow, there was no footage of her fall. No image of her slipping into the ocean. The trail just stopped. One moment she was there. The next, she wasn't. The ship sailed on, as though nothing had happened. Passengers ate breakfast, played shuffleboard, drank cocktails by the pool. Meanwhile, her family's world was crumbling. And in that silence, that terrifying silence, one truth became clear. At sea, people disappear. And sometimes, nobody ever finds out why. I'll never forget the feeling that settled over the ship that day. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was unease. That creeping sense that something was wrong, but nobody wanted to admit it. And the more questions her family asked, the less answers they got. But this is where the story begins to twist. Because what happened after her disappearance makes the mystery even darker. When word spread that she was missing, the ship changed. You could feel it in the air. The kind of heaviness that made every laugh a little quieter, every smile a little forced. People tried to carry on, sipping drinks, lounging by the pool, pretending everything was fine. But beneath it all was a single, unshakable question. How does a person just vanish? Her family refused to sit back. They retraced every step, desperate for answers. I remember watching her mother, pale and frantic, rushing through hallways, stopping passengers with trembling hands. "Did you see her? Did you see my daughter?" Some shook their heads, some avoided her eyes. But a few admitted they had seen something. One couple said they noticed her on the dance floor, laughing in that red dress. Another claimed they saw her leave barefoot, shoes dangling from her hand. But then came the story that made my skin crawl. A man swore he saw her walking quickly down a corridor, glancing over her shoulder as though someone was following her. He couldn't remember who, or even if he saw another figure in the shadows, just that she didn't look calm. She looked scared. The crew downplayed it. They said maybe she'd had too much to drink, maybe she wandered to the wrong deck. But the hours ticked by, and her cabin remained untouched. Shoes neatly by the bed, passport still sitting on the desk. As if she had vanished in mid-step. By noon, the crew made an announcement. "A passenger is unaccounted for. If you have any information, please report to security." Their tone was calm, too calm, like they were announcing a misplaced wallet, not a human life. And then, almost immediately, rumors began to swirl. Some passengers whispered about an argument they claimed to have overheard near the nightclub, raised voices, a woman shouting, "Leave me alone." Others insisted they heard a scream carried on the wind from the upper deck. But when the family pressed the crew for answers, they hit a wall. The official line was that she must have fallen overboard. An accident, nothing more. But if it was just an accident, why weren't the cameras showing it? That's the part that gnawed at everyone. Cruise ships are covered in surveillance. Every hallway, every deck, every casino, every dining room. The whole ship is under constant watch. Yet somehow, there was no footage of her fall. Her image simply stopped. One moment, she was walking. The next, she was gone. Her family begged the crew to slow the ship, to turn around, to search the waters. Hours passed before anything was done. And by then, if she had gone overboard, the currents could have carried her miles away. But here's what haunts me most. The ocean was calm that night, glassy, smooth, as if it were holding its breath. If she had fallen, someone should have heard the splash. Someone should have seen the ripples. But no one did. Nothing disturbed that silent water. Nothing at all. I can still picture her mother's face, pale and hollow, as she stood on the deck staring into the horizon. "She's out there," she whispered over and over, as if the waves might answer her back. Passengers began to speculate. Was she taken? Did someone lure her to a secluded part of the ship? Or was she hiding, trapped somewhere below deck, waiting to be found? Every theory was darker than the last, and with each passing hour, hope drained away. By the second day, investigators should have been swarming the ship. But that's not how it works at sea. Out here, in international waters, there's no clear law, no immediate justice. The cruise line controls what happens next. And what they decided was chillingly simple. They carried on. Entertainment continued. Shows went on. Restaurants served buffets. The ship didn't stop. To most passengers, life returned to normal. But for her family, there was no normal anymore. Only silence. And the endless ache of questions that would never be answered. I remember walking the corridors that night, feeling the weight of it pressing down. The laughter from the bars felt hollow. The music from the lounges seemed eerie, like a soundtrack to something sinister. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see her there, barefoot, red dress swaying, eyes wide with some unspoken warning. The sea has a way of swallowing secrets. But this one felt different. This wasn't just an accident. At least, it didn't feel like one. Too many details didn't add up. Too many questions had no answers. And the more we asked, the more the cruise line shut us out. That's when the theories began to take shape. Theories that still haunt anyone who's ever heard her story. If you could even call it that. Began with a press release. A single page, cold, detached. The cruise line stated that a passenger was unaccounted for and was believed to have gone overboard. Believed. No evidence, no confirmation, no footage. Just belief. I remember holding that paper, the words burning into me. Believed to have gone overboard. That was their explanation for a woman vanishing into thin air. Her family didn't accept it. They demanded to see the surveillance footage. After all, the ship had cameras everywhere. But the cruise line insisted the footage was inconclusive. That word became their shield. Inconclusive. Convenient, isn't it? A ship with hundreds of cameras somehow had nothing conclusive to show. I'll never forget her father's voice, low and shaking with rage, as he stood outside the captain's office. If my daughter fell, show me the proof. But they couldn't. Or wouldn't. Instead, the company doubled down on their accident theory. They painted a picture of her as reckless, drunk, maybe unstable. They said passengers sometimes fall, that the sea claims people every year. But to those of us who were there, that explanation never sat right. Let me tell you why. First, her cabin. The shoes placed neatly by her bed. The passport on the desk. Her clothes folded, not tossed aside. Does that sound like the room of someone who stumbled drunkenly out to her death? Second, the ocean itself. That night, the waters were calm. So calm you could see the moon's reflection like a silver mirror. If she had fallen, someone should have heard the splash. Someone should have noticed the ripples. But the passengers on deck that night swore they heard nothing. Nothing at all. And then came the stories the cruise line didn't want spreading. One passenger swore they saw her talking to a man in the nightclub. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket. They didn't hear the conversation, but they noticed her body language. She looked uncomfortable, defensive, like she wanted to get away. Another passenger claimed they heard shouting on the upper deck, a woman's voice crying, "Stop! Don't!" But when they reported it to security, they were brushed off, told they must have been mistaken, that it was probably just drunk passengers fooling around. But the whispers grew louder, and the more the family pushed, the more it felt like the cruise line was trying to silence them. It's no secret that cruise companies have a reputation for protecting themselves first. A disappearance is bad for business. An unsolved crime, even worse. So they bury it. They call it an accident. They use words like believed and inconclusive, and then they move on. But her family couldn't move on. And neither could I. Because here's the truth most people don't realize. Cruise ships are the perfect place to make someone disappear. Think about it. Once you're in international waters, jurisdiction becomes a maze. Whose laws apply? The country the ship left from? The country it's registered in? The waters it sails through? By the time anyone figures it out, the trail is cold. Evidence is gone. Witnesses scatter. And the ship? It keeps moving forward, carrying thousands of people who just want to enjoy their vacation. It's chilling, but it's true. If someone wanted to harm her, the ship itself worked in their favor. Her family begged for answers. They pleaded with authorities once the ship returned to port. But the investigation moved at a glacial pace. No immediate searches of crew quarters. No immediate questioning of passengers. Just paperwork, red tape, and silence. Theories began to split into three. Theory 1, accident. She slipped, fell overboard, and drowned. Simple, tragic. But if that were true, where was the footage? Where were the screams? Why did so many details of her final hours contradict the narrative? Theory 2, foul play. She was followed that night, maybe attacked, maybe pushed. If so, why wasn't anyone held accountable? Why didn't the cameras catch it? Unless someone tampered with them, unless footage was erased. Theory 3, cover-up, the darkest of all. That the cruise line knew more than they admitted, that they silenced witnesses, suppressed footage, and chose profit over truth. I don't know which theory is right. Maybe none of them, maybe all of them. But what I do know is this. Her disappearance wasn't just a tragedy. It was a mystery wrapped in silence, and every silence felt intentional. I remember standing on the deck late one night, long after the whispers had faded and most passengers had returned to their cabins. The air was cool, the sea black and endless. I leaned over the rail, staring into that abyss. And for the first time, I understood how easy it was. How a single push, a single slip, could erase a person completely. No body, no evidence, just water. But then, I remembered the shoes by her bed, the passport on the desk, the smile she wore as she left the club. She wasn't planning to vanish. She wasn't planning to die. And that's when the chill sank deep into me. Someone else may have been planning it for her. The ship eventually docked, as all ships do. Passengers filed down the gangway, sunburned and tired, clutching souvenirs and memories. But for her family, there were no souvenirs, no happy photographs to take home. Just an empty cabin, just questions that refused to be answered. Authorities met the ship at port, but their investigation was slow, almost ceremonial. Statements were taken, forms were filled out. But by then the trail was ice cold. Witnesses had scattered back to their homes in different countries. Crew members rotated to other ships. And the ocean, vast and merciless, had swallowed any trace of evidence. Her family refused to let it go. They filed lawsuits, demanding the release of security footage, demanding answers from the cruise line. But the company's lawyers wrapped themselves in phrases like insufficient evidence and unsubstantiated claims. To them, it wasn't a missing woman, it was a liability. The case dragged on for months, then years. Headlines labeled it The Vanishing Passenger. True crime blogs dissected every detail. Forums buzzed with theories. Podcasts speculated endlessly. Was it an accident? Was she pushed? Was it covered up? Everyone had an opinion, but no one had proof. Her family's pain became public spectacle, their grief reduced to speculation and debate. And through it all, the ocean kept its silence. What haunts me most isn't just that she disappeared, it's how easily it happened. How effortlessly the ship seemed to swallow her story whole. One moment, she was laughing in a red dress. The next, she was nothing more than a rumor carried by the wind. And maybe that's the real horror, not just her disappearance, but the realization that it could happen to anyone. That you could step onto a cruise ship surrounded by thousands of people, cameras watching every corner, and still vanish without a trace. And the world would keep moving. The ship would keep sailing, life would carry on as though you had never existed. Her family still fights for answers. They still light candles on her birthday, still speak of her in the present tense, as though she might walk through the door at any moment. But deep down, they know. The ocean doesn't give back what it takes. I stood on that same deck years later, long after the case had faded from headlines, staring out at the endless waves. The water looked calm, peaceful, almost innocent. But I knew better. I knew the truth. The sea doesn't erase. The sea remembers. And somewhere beneath those waves lies a secret too heavy to ever rise again. And so her story ends, not with answers, but with silence. A silence that lingers long after the ship has docked, long after the music has faded, long after the laughter has died. But here's the part that will stay with you. The part that will creep into your mind the next time you consider booking a cruise. She wasn't the first, and she wasn't the last. People vanish at sea more often than you think. Some fall, some jump, some are pushed, and some simply disappear, leaving nothing behind but an empty cabin and a family's endless questions. So the next time you step onto a cruise ship, remember her story. Remember the shoes neatly by the bed, the passport untouched on the desk, the smile caught on camera, moments before she vanished. Because if it happened to her, it could happen to anyone, even you. And if you think that's chilling, wait until you hear about the night when flames tore through a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean, trapping thousands of passengers in a nightmare of smoke, fire, and panic. I remember the night the fire began because it started like any other night at sea. Calm, ordinary, deceptively peaceful. The air was warm, carrying the scent of salt and sunscreen. Music drifted up from the lounges. Laughter echoed down the corridors, and the ship glided effortlessly across black waters that seemed endless in every direction. To most of us, it was paradise. To me, it would become the single most terrifying experience of my life. Cruises are designed to feel like cities that never sleep. There's always a show, always a bar open, always people wandering the decks under neon lights. That night was no different. Families sat in restaurants finishing desserts. Couples held hands under the stars. Kids splashed in pools long past bedtime. And somewhere, deep in the belly of the ship, a spark was born. No one noticed at first. Why would they? Fires weren't supposed to happen here, not in this floating palace of steel and glass. But fires don't care about design. Fires don't care about rules. They just grow. I was in my cabin when I smelled it. At first, I thought it was just someone cooking late at night, a faint, acrid scent of something burnt. But within minutes, it changed. It thickened. It clung to the air in a way food never could. It was smoke. And then came the alarm. A shrill, piercing sound ripped through the hallways, sharp enough to cut through laughter, through sleep, through denial. Doors slammed open. Passengers stumbled out, eyes wide, hearts racing. The voice over the intercom was calm. Too calm. "Attention passengers, we are experiencing a small technical issue. Please remain calm." A technical issue. That's what they called it. But then the lights flickered, and the smoke began to roll down the corridors like a living thing. Panic spread fast. Parents clutched children. Couples shouted to one another. The hallways filled with chaos as passengers pushed toward exits, some screaming, some frozen in shock. The crew appeared, shouting directions, waving flashlights, but their voices were nearly drowned out by the sound of the alarm, the coughing, the rising tide of fear. I'll never forget the look in people's eyes. The dawning realization that we weren't safe, that we were trapped in the middle of an ocean, and fire, the one thing a ship is never supposed to face, was already spreading somewhere deep below our feet. The smell grew stronger, acrid, bitter. Every breath felt like swallowing knives. And the more I coughed, the more the truth sank in. This wasn't small. This wasn't technical. This was survival. We were on fire, and the ocean stretched in every direction, black and endless. There was nowhere to run. The moment I stepped out of my cabin, I knew everything had changed. The hallway, usually bright and sterile, was now clouded with smoke that stung my eyes and clawed at my lungs. People rushed past me in all directions, some barefoot, some half-dressed clutching children, dragging luggage they would later abandon. The alarm screamed above us, a metallic wail that made every nerve in my body feel like it was on fire too. The crew shouted over the chaos, "Stay calm! This way! Follow the lights!" But calm was impossible. The emergency lights along the floor flickered, glowing dimly through the haze, and passengers stumbled toward them like moths to a dying flame. I could hear the fire before I saw it. A deep roar, muffled but alive, coming from the lower decks. It sounded like a monster waking up. Every few seconds there was a metallic groan, the sound of steel expanding, bending under impossible heat. It made my skin crawl. Somewhere behind me, a woman screamed. I turned just in time to see a man pounding on a locked door, shouting for someone inside. The smoke was already thick there, black and choking. I wanted to help, but the crowd surged forward, pulling me away. That's what happens in disasters. Survival takes over. You don't think. You just move. We reached a stairwell, and that's when the real panic hit. The stairwell was jammed with bodies, people shoving, screaming, fighting to get to higher decks. Children cried. Luggage tumbled down the steps. Someone fell and was nearly trampled before strangers pulled them up. The air was hotter here, suffocating. I could feel sweat trickling down my back, the smoke searing my throat with every gasp. And then the lights went out. For a moment, everything was black. Absolute, suffocating black. The only sounds were coughing, screaming, the thud of feet against steel. Someone shouted, "It's spreading!" Another voice cried, "We're trapped!" The darkness made the panic worse. People clawed at each other, desperate to move in any direction that felt like escape. When the lights flickered back, dim and sickly yellow, I caught sight of the smoke curling up the stairwell, thick and oily. It wasn't just a fire anymore. It was a flood. A flood of smoke, drowning us from the inside out. I remember locking eyes with a crew member, his face smeared with soot, flashlight shaking in his hand. He looked terrified too, though he tried to hide it. "Keep moving," he shouted. "Don't stop." But his voice cracked halfway through, betraying him. He was just as scared as the rest of us. As we climbed, I passed open corridors glowing orange at the far end. The fire was spreading faster than anyone expected, licking at the walls, devouring furniture, turning glass into molten streaks. I could hear it, that terrible roar, louder now, alive. It felt less like flames, and more like the ship itself was screaming. People were starting to lose control. I saw a man shove others out of the way, clawing his path upward. I saw a woman faint, her body limp as strangers tried to carry her. I saw passengers banging on locked doors, desperate for escape routes that didn't exist. And through it all, the same thought pounded in my head: there's no fire truck coming. No city hydrant, no escape. We are surrounded by nothing but water, and none of it can save us. When I finally burst onto an upper deck, the night air hit me like salvation. Cool, sharp, filled with the sound of chaos. Passengers were everywhere, coughing, crying, clinging to railings. Some wore life jackets, others clutched towels over their mouths. The smoke poured out of the lower decks in black plumes, carried by the wind. I stumbled toward the railing, my lungs aching, and looked down. Lifeboats dangled half-lowered into the water, crews shouting orders that nobody seemed to understand. People tried to climb in too early, rocking the boats dangerously. Others hesitated, too afraid to step inside. The smell of burning plastic and metal filled the air, thick and suffocating, mingling with the salt of the sea. That's when I realized we weren't just passengers anymore. We were survivors, fighting against time, against fire, against the endless black ocean, and the night had only just begun. The upper deck should have felt like safety, but it didn't. It felt like the edge of the world. Behind us, black smoke billowed from the heart of the ship, turning the night sky into a choking haze. Ahead of us, only the vast, endless ocean-black water that looked every bit as deadly as the fire itself. We were trapped between two kinds of death. The crew tried to organize the passengers, their voices cracking through megaphones. "Remain calm, we are in control of the situation." But no one believed them anymore. Their words felt hollow, drowned out by the coughing, the crying, the roar of the flames below. The fire was spreading fast. You could see it glowing from cabin windows, flickers of orange and red against the steel hull. Every so often, a loud metallic groan would echo through the ship, as if the steel itself were screaming in pain. The air was thick with ash and heat, every breath a battle. People were panicking. Some clutched the railings and prayed. Others screamed at the crew, demanding answers. Families huddled together, faces streaked with soot. I saw one man drop to his knees, holding his child tight, whispering over and over, "We're not going to make it. We're not going to make it." And then came the lifeboats. Lowering them was chaos. The crew shouted orders, but the passengers didn't listen. Some tried to climb in before the boats were ready, tipping them dangerously. Others refused to get in at all, terrified of being dropped into the black, freezing sea. One lifeboat swung violently as people fought to climb aboard, bodies crashing into each other, screams tearing through the night. I couldn't look away. It was survival at its rawest, and it was horrifying. The smell of burning plastic grew stronger, acrid and bitter. I glanced back, and my stomach dropped. Flames were visible now on the deck below. They licked at the steel railings, turning them red hot, climbing higher with every breath of wind. The fire wasn't just in the lower decks anymore. It was coming for us. I made my way toward one of the lifeboats, pushed along by the frantic crowd. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear. I could feel the heat at my back, the fire chasing me even as the ocean waited below. A woman near me refused to move. She clung to the railing, shaking her head, crying, I can't get in there." A crew member tried to pull her, shouting that it was her only chance, but she fought against him, sobbing. And then, in one sudden motion, she slipped, her body disappearing into the black water below. The sound of her scream cut off instantly, swallowed by the sea. No one moved to help. No one could. We all just stood there, frozen, the image burned into our minds forever. The lifeboats finally began lowering, creaking and swaying as the crew worked furiously. The crowd surged forward again, shoving, climbing, desperate to escape. I managed to squeeze inside one, pressed against strangers, our bodies trembling, our breaths ragged. The ropes groaned as we descended, the fire above painting the night sky red. When we hit the water, the lifeboat rocked violently. People screamed, clutching each other, some already sobbing uncontrollably. From down there, the sight of the ship was even worse. Flames poured out of its sides, smoke rising in black towers. It looked less like a cruise ship and more like a floating inferno, a beacon of terror in the middle of a silent, endless ocean. We drifted just far enough to escape the immediate heat, but not far enough to escape the sight or the sounds. Explosions echoed from within the ship as parts of it collapsed, sending sparks into the sky like fireworks. The screams of those still on board carried across the water, chilling, inhuman, unforgettable. I sat there, clutching the side of the lifeboat, shaking so hard I thought my bones might shatter. Around me, people whispered prayers, cried out names of loved ones, begged for the nightmare to end. Every face was pale, every eye wide with terror. We had escaped the fire, but the night was far from over. Because the ocean was just as merciless, the waves rocked us endlessly, the cold biting at our skin. And in the distance, the burning ship groaned like a dying animal, sending embers into the dark sky. It felt unreal, like watching the end of the world. And as the night dragged on, one question gnawed at me. Were we really safe out here? Or had we only traded one kind of death for another? The lifeboat rocked endlessly, every wave making us jolt, every splash of seawater soaking our clothes and chilling our bones. The fire behind us roared on, an unholy glow against the black sky. It didn't look like a ship anymore. It looked like a torch, burning bright in the middle of nowhere, a signal of desperation that no one might ever see. Hours passed, though time felt meaningless out there. Some prayed, their words broken and shaky. Others sat in silence, staring at the flames as though hypnotized. Children whimpered, their small cries muffled against their parents' chests. And all of us wondered the same thing: would anyone find us before it was too late? The ocean at night is a cruel companion. It is vast, endless, indifferent. It doesn't care if you're tired or thirsty or scared. It doesn't care if you live or die. And as the hours dragged on, I felt that truth pressing in on me. Every shadow on the horizon looked like hope, then faded back into nothing. Every distant splash sounded like salvation, then vanished into silence. At one point, another lifeboat drifted close. The faces inside were as pale and hollow as ours, eyes wide with shock. Soot streaked across their skin. A man shouted across the waves, "Is anyone hurt? Does anyone have water?" His voice cracked with desperation. Someone in our boat whispered, "We barely have enough for ourselves." That silence, it was heavier than any scream. Meanwhile, the ship groaned louder and louder, collapsing in on itself. Metal shrieked, explosions burst from within, sending sparks into the sky. And then, with a sound I'll never forget, like thunder tearing the world apart, part of it sank. The flames hissed as the sea swallowed steel. Passengers in the lifeboats screamed, some calling out names, others just crying. Watching it disappear was like watching our lives vanish with it. But the worst part wasn't the fire, or the sinking, or even the waiting. It was the knowing. The knowing that not everyone had made it out. That behind those flames, behind those collapsing walls, there had been people. People who never got to the lifeboats. People whose screams had already gone silent. When rescue finally came, it was almost surreal. A freighter, drawn by the sight of the fire and the smoke that had risen miles into the air. Its massive shape loomed over us, spotlights sweeping across the waves, catching our lifeboats in their beams. People cheered, sobbed, collapsed with relief. But inside, the horror didn't leave. It clung to us, heavy and sharp, even as we were pulled to safety. The rescue didn't erase what had happened. It didn't erase the hours of smoke filling our lungs, the image of people fighting for lifeboats, the sound of steel screaming as it bent and broke. It didn't erase the faces of those who never made it out. And in the days that followed, as headlines blared about the cruise ship Inferno, the company insisted again that everything had been under control, that the crew had acted swiftly, that the loss was tragic but unavoidable. But those of us who lived through it knew the truth. There was no control, no calm, only chaos, panic, and luck. Luck that we had found the lifeboats in time. Luck that another ship had seen the flames. Luck that the ocean, for once, hadn't swallowed us whole. Still, that night never left me. I can close my eyes even now and hear it. The crackle of flames devouring steel. The screams carried across black water. The silence that followed. Survivors carry scars that don't show on their skin. They carry nightmares. And some of us, we carry the unbearable weight of knowing we lived when others didn't. I survived the fire in the middle of the ocean, but the ocean isn't done with me, because not all ships burn. Some ships don't even die. They sail empty, abandoned, drifting across waters with no crew, no passengers, no explanation. Ships that appear where no one expects them. Ships that carry nothing but silence. And those are even more terrifying. The sea was calm the night we first saw her. The kind of calm that feels almost staged, where the water is so flat it reflects the stars like glass, and the silence feels heavy enough to press against your chest. We were 3 days out, miles from any port, the world reduced to nothing but black water and silver sky. It should have been peaceful, but peace at sea never lasts. It started with a light, a faint glow on the horizon, flickering, almost like a lantern swinging in the dark. At first, we thought it was another vessel, a fishing boat maybe, or a freighter crossing our path. But as we drew closer, it became clear this wasn't normal. The light was too dim, too erratic, sometimes vanishing completely, then reappearing as if the sea itself were breathing it in and out. By dawn, we saw it. A ship. Large, looming, its silhouette etched against the rising sun. It drifted aimlessly, no course, no wake trailing behind. The kind of drifting that spoke not of leisure, but of abandonment. There was something wrong with it immediately. No sound, no movement, no voices calling out across the water, no crew on deck, just silence. A silence so thick it made my skin crawl. We slowed as we passed her, scanning the decks with binoculars. The name on the stern was half faded, letters peeling like old paint. Windows stared back at us, dark and hollow. The ship looked dead, but here's the part that made my stomach turn. It wasn't rotting. It wasn't falling apart like a wreck that had been drifting for years. It looked fresh, too fresh, as if the crew had simply walked away yesterday, leaving everything behind. Whispers spread fast among us. Some said it was a derelict freighter, abandoned after a fire. Others muttered darker things, pirates, foul play, something the company didn't want us to know. And then came the word that no one wanted to say out loud, but everyone was thinking, ghost ship. The captain debated for hours. Protocol demanded we investigate. What if there were survivors? What if there was distress? But every minute that passed, the unease grew heavier. There's a superstition at sea, one old as the tides. Ghost ships are omens, bad luck, death following in their wake. But eventually, duty won. A small team prepared to board, and I was with them. The closer we came, the worse the feeling got. The air around the ship felt colder, the water darker, the silence absolute. When our boat scraped against its hull, the sound echoed like a scream in an empty cathedral. We climbed the rusted ladder, hearts pounding, breaths shallow. And when I set foot on the deck, I knew instantly, whatever happened here, it wasn't natural. The deck was spotless, eerily so. No bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just scattered belongings, a shoe here, a coffee cup there, a deck chair pulled out as if someone had just been sitting in it minutes before. It looked like life had been interrupted mid-step, mid-breath. But there was no life, not a single person. We called out. Our voices bounced back at us, swallowed by silence. We searched cabins, kitchens, hallways. Every room told the same story, abandoned in haste. Food still on tables, beds unmade, clothes laid out for days that never came. And the deeper we went, the colder it got. Not physically, though the air did feel strange, damp, stale, but inside. That kind of cold that seeps into your bones and whispers, "You don't belong here." I tried to convince myself it was just nerves, just imagination. But then I found the logbook. And that's when the story of the ghost ship truly began. The logbook was old, its leather cover cracked, its pages stained with salt and grease. But the handwriting inside was recent. Neat at first, then scrawled and frantic, as though the writer's hand had started to tremble. The early entries were mundane. Weather notes, cargo details, daily routines. But as I flipped through, the tone shifted. Words like strange noises at night, crew unsettled, shadows on the deck when no one was there. The final entry stopped me cold. If anyone finds this, we are not alone. I read it twice, my mouth dry, my heart pounding. Not alone. What did that mean? Pirates? Mutiny? Or something else? Something the writer hadn't dared describe. We pressed deeper into the ship, our footsteps echoing through empty hallways. The air was damp, thick, carrying a faint metallic tang. Every sound, every creak of steel, every groan of the hull felt amplified. We whispered to each other without meaning to, our voices hushed, as if we were intruding in a place that didn't want us there. Cabins told the same story again and again, lives interrupted. Half-eaten meals still sat on tables, coffee cups cold, clothing laid out but never worn. One cabin held a child's toy boat, sitting neatly on the bed as though waiting for its owner to return. Another held a radio, switched on but long dead. It wasn't the emptiness that chilled me, it was the presence of life, frozen mid-motion, without any sign of where that life had gone. In the galley, pots still hung over cold burners. A knife lay on the counter beside half-sliced bread. In the crew's lounge, a deck of cards was spread across the table mid-game, chips scattered, as if players had stood up suddenly and never came back. "Maybe they evacuated," one of the men whispered, but his voice shook. Evacuated to where? The lifeboats were still there, strapped tightly in place, not a single one missing. And that was when I felt it. The distinct, heavy sensation of being watched. It started as a tickle at the back of my neck, the instinct that makes your skin prickle before your brain can explain why. I turned, slowly, flashlight cutting across the hallway. Nothing, just shadows, shifting against the walls. But the feeling didn't leave. If anything, it grew stronger. We kept moving. Deeper. Always deeper. The corridors grew darker, the silence thicker, the air colder. The ship was massive, but it felt like it was closing in around us, pressing tighter with every step. At one point, we reached the radio room. The equipment was still there, dials twisted, switches flipped. A message had been half-typed into the machine, letters jagged and smeared. It read, "Help, they are." And then it stopped. The crew member beside me muttered a curse under his breath and refused to touch the machine. By now, even the bravest among us looked pale. We whispered theories we didn't want to believe. Sudden illness, mutiny, mass evacuation. But none of them explained the silence. None of them explained why the lifeboats were untouched, why everything looked so fresh, as though the crew had been here just yesterday. And then came the sound. Faint at first, a metallic clang somewhere deep below us. We froze, flashlights jerking toward the noise. Another clang, closer this time. Not random, not the ship settling. It was deliberate. "Someone's here," one of us whispered. But if someone was here, why hadn't they answered our calls? Why had they left everything behind? We followed the sound, hearts pounding, breaths shallow. The clangs echoed through the belly of the ship, drawing us lower, pulling us deeper into the dark. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But we didn't. We couldn't. We had to know. And what we found at the bottom of that stairwell was worse than anything we imagined. We moved cautiously down the stairwell, our flashlights sweeping over rusted steel and peeling paint. The sound echoed again. A metallic clang, sharp and deliberate, reverberating through the hollow belly of the ship. Each step downward felt like a descent into something we weren't supposed to see. When we reached the lower deck, the air was different. Heavier. Damp, with a smell I couldn't place. Not just salt and rust, but something fouler, something organic, like decay barely masked by sea air. It clung to my throat and made me swallow hard against the bile rising. We entered a long corridor, lined with crew quarters. Flashlight beams bounced across the walls, catching glimpses of photographs taped above bunks, open notebooks, boots left on the floor. It looked like the crew had just stepped out, as if they might walk back in at any moment. But the silence was crushing. Then we saw the first clue. A door stood ajar, hinges bent. Inside, the cabin was in disarray. Papers scattered, mattress overturned, drawers yanked open. On the wall, scratched deep into the paint, were 3 words, greater than "Don't go below." My blood ran cold. The others shifted uneasily, muttering curses under their breath. Who had written it? And what had they meant? The clang echoed again, this time from the engine room. Louder, closer, like something striking steel, rhythmic, almost purposeful. Every instinct screamed to leave. to climb back to the deck and abandon this ship to whatever haunted it. But duty, curiosity, fear of looking weak, something drove us forward. We pushed through the door into the engine room, and that's when the smell hit us full force. Thick, rancid. The stench of rot so powerful it seemed to crawl into our lungs and stay there. Our flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing machinery coated in grime. Gauges shattered, oil pooled across the floor. But it wasn't the machinery that froze us. It was what was beside it. A shoe. A man's shoe, scuffed and salt-stained, lying on its side. Next to it, a torn shirt, crusted with something dark that looked horribly like blood. Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ." We scattered, searching, calling out in voices that cracked under the weight of fear, but no one answered. No footsteps, no shouts, no survivors. Just that echoing clang, now so close it felt like it was coming from within the very walls. Then, my flashlight landed on something worse. In the corner of the engine room was a hatch. Its wheel was locked tight, rust eating at the bolts. But scratched into the steel, deep enough to bend the metal, were claw marks. Long, frantic, desperate. As if someone had tried to tear their way out. My heart stopped. We stood there in silence, the clang suddenly gone, replaced by a stillness so profound it felt suffocating. One of the men finally whispered, "We need to leave, now." His voice shook, his face pale. But as we turned, something moved, a shadow, fast, darting just beyond the beam of my flashlight. I spun, breath caught in my throat, light cutting across machinery and pipes. Nothing, just emptiness. But I know what I saw. It wasn't my imagination. Something was down there, watching us. Panic took hold. We scrambled back up the stairwell, boots pounding against steel, flashlights jerking wildly. Every sound behind us, every creak, every groan, felt like footsteps chasing us. I didn't look back. I couldn't. When we finally burst onto the deck again, gasping for air, the sunlight nearly blinded us. But the silence of the ghost ship was still there, pressing down like a weight. We had seen enough. Too much. And yet, the logbook's words echoed in my mind. If anyone finds this, we are not alone. Now I believed it. Because whatever had taken the crew, it wasn't gone. It was still here. We stood on the deck, shaken, our flashlights trembling in our hands. The silence of the ghost ship wrapped around us like a shroud. No wind, no gulls, no waves against the hull. Just the kind of stillness that felt unnatural, wrong, as though even the sea itself was holding its breath. The captain's voice came crackling through the radio we'd brought. "Report! What have you found?" None of us spoke at first. What could we say? That the crew had clawed at locked hatches? That blood stains lingered in the engine room? That shadows moved where no one should be? Finally, one of us whispered into the receiver. No survivors, no explanation. There was a long pause. Then the captain's order came sharp and final. "Get off that ship, now." We didn't argue. Crossing back to our own vessel was the longest journey of my life. Every creak of rope, every splash of the sea made me flinch. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the empty decks, something unseen, waiting. As I climbed down the ladder, I made the mistake of looking back. There, in one of the upper windows, I saw it, a figure, just for an instant, pale, tall, unmoving, watching. And then gone. My flashlight cut across the glass, but it was empty again, dark and hollow. Still, I know what I saw. When we finally reached the safety of our ship, the silence broke all at once. We spoke over each other, frantic, desperate to make sense of what we'd just endured. But nothing added up. How could an entire crew vanish without a trace? Why had the ship been left in perfect order, as though its people had simply melted away? And what, or who, had left those scratches on the hatch? The official report was clinical, stripped of the terror we'd lived. Unmanned vessel, no survivors, no conclusive evidence of cause. But the truth never made it onto paper. That night, as we sailed away, the ghost ship drifted silently into the horizon, growing smaller until it was swallowed by mist. Some swore they saw lights flicker on its decks long after we'd left it behind. Others claimed they heard voices carried by the wind, faint, desperate, calling for help. I didn't sleep for days. When I closed my eyes, I saw the writing on the wall, "Don't go below." I heard the clang echoing from the engine room. I saw the pale figure in the window, watching us leave. And even now, years later, the memory clings to me. Because ghost ships are real, not always with phantoms and curses, sometimes just with silence, with questions no one can answer. But once you've stood on one, once you've felt that emptiness, you know the sea keeps its secrets. And sometimes it lets them drift back into our world, just long enough to remind us how powerless we really are. The ghost ship still drifts out there, somewhere. Maybe another crew will find it. Maybe they'll ignore the warnings and go below. Maybe they'll never come back. And maybe that's how legends are born. But I'll tell you this, I'd rather face fire again, or storms, or the endless black of the ocean, than ever set foot on a ghost ship a second time. Because what's worse than a ship filled with screams is a ship filled with silence. And if you think that's terrifying, wait until you hear about the cabin that shouldn't exist. A cabin passengers swear they stayed in, only to learn it was never on the ship's blueprint at all. I had been on cruises before, but this one was different. I booked it on impulse, a discounted ticket through a last-minute deal. The ship was massive, gleaming in the sunlight when I first boarded, the kind of vessel that promised comfort, safety, and escape from the world. I thought I'd get exactly that. Instead, I got a nightmare. When I checked in at the reception desk, the woman smiled politely and handed me my key card. "Cabin C, -19, she said. Her tone was routine, bored even. I nodded, thanked her, and wheeled my bag down the corridor. The ship's hallways stretched endlessly, identical doors on either side, carpet patterned to disguise stains, low ceilings that made everything feel closer than it should. I followed the signs toward Deck C, but when I reached the hallway where C-19 should have been, I froze. There was no C-19. The number skipped. C-17, C-18, C-20. Confused, I walked back and forth 3 times, convinced I'd missed it. But no, C-19 simply wasn't there. Still, when I slid my keycard against the wall between C-18 and C-20, something clicked, and a door appeared. Not a door like the others. Not smooth, polished, modern. This one was different. The paint was peeling, the brass handle tarnished, the number plate bent and dull. It looked older, like it had been there longer than the rest of the ship, and yet, when I pushed it open, it worked. Inside, the cabin was smaller than I expected. The ceiling, lower. The air faintly stale, with a musty scent I couldn't place. The bed was made neatly, but the sheets looked yellowed, aged. The lamp flickered when I turned it on. And though I couldn't explain why, I had the distinct feeling the room hadn't been used in a very long time. Still, exhaustion won out. I unpacked, lay down, and told myself it was fine. Just an old room, just quirks. But that night, I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of knocking. Slow, rhythmic, coming from inside the walls. At first, I thought it was just the usual creaks and groans of a ship settling against the waves. But as I listened, the knocking grew sharper, more deliberate. 3 knocks, a pause. 3 more. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, staring at the wall where the sound came from. Behind it, there should have been nothing but the sea. And then, faintly, I heard it, a voice, whispering. Too soft to make out the words, too close to be real. I didn't sleep again that night. And when I went to the reception desk the next morning to complain, the woman looked at me with a puzzled frown and said, "There is no cabin C-19. The receptionist's words echoed in my head long after I left the desk. There is no cabin C-19. She said it flatly, with no trace of irony, as though she genuinely believed it. But I had slept there. I had unpacked my things there. My keycard still worked there. When I pressed her further, she grew flustered, flipping through her computer. The numbers skipped from C-18 to C-20. Always have. Perhaps you misread your room number. She handed me a map of the deck to prove it. Sure enough, no C-19. I returned anyway. I had to. And sure enough, between C-18 and C-20, the same door waited. Old, peeling, stubbornly out of place. My keycard clicked, the lock turned, and the stale air of that impossible cabin welcomed me back. That night, the knocking returned. It began at the same time, 3:17 a.m. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. Louder this time, sharper, as though whoever was behind the wall wanted me to answer. I pressed my ear against the plaster, holding my breath. For a long moment, there was silence, and then a whisper, "Let me out." I staggered back, my skin crawling. My mind scrambled for explanations. A prank, thin walls, the mechanics of the ship. But nothing fit. Behind that wall should have been open sea. No corridor, no cabin, nothing. Sleep was impossible. I sat in the chair, lamp flickering, staring at the wall until dawn. The next morning, I asked a steward about the room. He glanced around nervously before whispering, "Sir, don't stay in that cabin." His voice was low, urgent. "Some passengers, they go in, but they don't always come out." I tried to laugh it off, but he didn't smile. His hands shook as he pushed the cart of linens away, refusing to say more. That day, I explored the cabin in daylight, searching for answers. That's when I noticed something strange. The dimensions didn't add up. From the outside, the space between C-18 and C-20 was narrow, maybe 10 feet at most. But inside the cabin, the walls stretched farther. The room was too wide, too deep, as if it extended into a place that shouldn't exist. And then there was the mirror. It hung above the desk, tarnished at the edges, warped slightly. At first glance, it reflected the room normally. Bed, lamp, chair. But when I leaned closer, I realized something was wrong. My reflection was slower, a heartbeat behind. When I raised my hand, the figure in the glass hesitated before copying me. I backed away, breath sharp, my pulse racing. That night, the knocking came again. Louder, more insistent. This time, the whispers were clearer. Multiple voices, overlapping, urgent, pleading. "Help us. Don't leave. Open the door." The air grew icy cold. My breath fogged in front of me. The walls themselves seemed to tremble with every knock. And then, as I sat frozen in terror, the mirror began to fog, as though someone on the other side was breathing against it. I grabbed my bag and fled the cabin, sprinting down the hallway, heart pounding. When I returned the next morning with a crew member to prove I wasn't imagining things, the door was gone. Between C-18 and C-20, there was only a blank stretch of wall, smooth, seamless. No C-19. The crew member looked at me strangely. "Sir, I told you. There's no cabin here." But I still had the keycard, still had my belongings locked inside, still had the memory of those whispers seared into my brain. And deep down, I knew the cabin would come back. It was waiting for me. For 2 days, I avoided Deck C altogether. I stayed by the pool, ate at the buffet, tried to distract myself with the endless entertainments cruise ships are known for. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the memory of that cabin, the warped mirror, the whispers, the way the door had vanished overnight like it had never been there at all. And yet, my keycard still worked. I carried it in my pocket like a curse, always aware of its presence. On the third night, my curiosity, or maybe my obsession, got the better of me. I returned to the hallway between C-18 and C-20. At first, just the same blank stretch of wall. I almost turned away. But then, with a low creak, the outline of a door appeared. There it was again, cabin C-19, waiting for me. I slid the key card, the lock clicked, and the door opened. The air inside was colder than before, the musty scent sharper, like mold and seawater. My belongings were still there. Clothes folded, toothbrush on the sink, as if nothing had changed. But the lamp flickered more violently. The walls seemed darker, almost damp to the touch. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but instead, I stayed. I told myself I needed answers. That night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the knocking began again. Louder, harder. The walls shuddered with each blow. And then came the whispers. Not faint this time, not muffled, clear. Dozens of voices layered together. Urgent, desperate. Let US out. We're still here. Don't leave US behind. I pressed myself against the wall, trembling. Who's there? I whispered before I could stop myself. The voices fell silent. And then, from the mirror, a face appeared. At first, just a blur in the fog. Then, sharper, clearer, pale skin, hollow eyes, lips moving soundlessly. I stumbled back, but more faces emerged. Dozens. Men, women, even children, their faces pressed against the glass from the other side, as if trapped within. Their mouths moved in unison now, forming words I could finally hear. Join us. The mirror began to rattle, its frame shaking violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across the glass. My lamp flickered and went out, plunging the cabin into darkness except for the faint, glowing light from the fractured mirror. The knocking on the wall turned into pounding, furious, relentless. Something was trying to break through. And then the mirror shattered. Glass sprayed across the room, shards skittering across the floor. But instead of a blank wall behind it, I saw another cabin, a space that shouldn't exist. Beds unmade, suitcases open. And in the middle of it all, people. Or what was left of them. They stood in the darkness, their faces the same ones I'd seen in the mirror. Pale, lifeless, eyes hollow. They reached toward me, hands clawing through the broken frame, their mouths opening in a single unified scream that made the walls shake. I ran. I didn't stop to grab my things. Didn't look back. I tore through the hallway, heart hammering, footsteps echoing too loudly in the empty corridor. When I glanced over my shoulder, the door to C-19 had vanished again, leaving nothing but smooth wall. But I knew what I'd seen. That room wasn't just a cabin. It was a trap, a prison, a place where the lost were kept, waiting for someone else to join them. And for one terrible moment, I knew they had chosen me. I didn't stop running until I was on the upper deck, lungs burning, sweat cold on my skin. I tried to tell myself it was just exhaustion, just a nightmare brought on by lack of sleep and too much sea air. But the cuts on my hands from the shattered glass told another story. The next morning I went straight to reception. My voice shook as I demanded answers. Cabin C-19. What the hell is it? What's inside that room? The woman at the desk looked at me the way you look at someone who's gone mad. Sir, she said firmly, there is no cabin C-19. The numbering skips. It always has. Perhaps you had too much to drink last night. I slammed my keycard on the counter, then explained this. She picked it up, frowned, and slid it into her computer. After a moment, her expression shifted, confusion first, then fear. She quickly handed it back to me. This card isn't registered. It doesn't exist in our system. I leaned in. But it opens the door. Her lips pressed together tightly. She didn't answer. Instead, she called for security. 2 officers arrived, calm but firm, escorting me back to my new cabin, C-312, far on the opposite end of the ship. For your comfort, they said. But I knew the truth. They wanted me as far away from Deck C as possible. That night, in my new cabin, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the ship made me jump. Every shadow in the hallway seemed longer than it should have been. I kept thinking about the faces in the mirror, the whispers, the clawing hands reaching through shattered glass. I told myself I was safe, that the door was gone, that whatever C-19 was, it couldn't touch me anymore. But then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., I heard it again. Knocking. 3 slow knocks. This time, not through the wall, not through the mirror, but at my cabin door. I froze in bed, my chest tight, every nerve in my body screaming. The knocking came again, louder, closer. I forced myself up, trembling, and approached the door. "Who's there?" I whispered. Silence. Then, faintly, through the steel voices, dozens of them, layered together, urgent and pleading, "Let us in." My hand hovered over the handle. For one insane second, I almost opened it. Almost gave in to the weight of those voices pressing against me. But I didn't. I stumbled back, heart racing, covering my ears. The knocking grew violent, shaking the frame. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence again. When I finally opened the door at dawn, the hallway was empty. But lying on the carpet outside was my old key card, the one for cabin C-19. I left it there. The rest of the cruise passed in a blur. I barely ate, barely spoke, barely slept. When the ship finally docked, I practically ran down the gangway, desperate to put the nightmare behind me. But even now, years later, I still wake at 3:17 a.m. Sometimes I hear the knocking, sometimes I hear the whispers, and once, just once, I saw the outline of a door at the far end of my bedroom wall, where no door should be. I'll tell you this, cabins aren't always what they seem. And on some ships, there are rooms you should never enter, rooms that wait patiently for the next unlucky soul. And if you think that's disturbing, wait until you hear about the passenger who checked into his cabin, was seen around the ship all week, attended dinners and shows. But when we docked at the end of the trip, the crew discovered something terrifying. He had never been on the passenger list at all. Story 5. The first time I saw him was on the deck, just after sunset. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and violet, the air warm, with the promise of another easy night at sea. He was leaning against the railing, staring out at the horizon, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Something about him stood out immediately. Not because he looked unusual. In fact, he looked ordinary. Average height, dark hair graying at the temples, neatly dressed. But there was a stillness about him, a kind of focus in the way he stared at the water that made me hesitate before approaching. I was traveling alone, so conversation was a welcome distraction. I walked up beside him, made some offhand comment about the beauty of the sunset. He turned slowly, as though pulling himself back from a long distance, and smiled. "You're right," he said. His voice was calm, almost soothing. "The sea hides things in its colors." We spoke for a while. His name was Daniel. At least, that's what he told me. He said he'd been on cruises before, that he loved the feeling of being disconnected from the world, adrift between nowhere and somewhere. There was a weight to his words, as if they carried more meaning than I could catch. Dinner was starting soon, so I excused myself. He nodded politely, lifting his glass in farewell. "See you around," he said, and I did. The next morning he was at breakfast, sitting alone at a corner table. He waved when he saw me, inviting me over. We ate together, talking about trivial things, the shows, the food, the ship itself. He spoke with a kind of timeless patience, never rushing, never interrupting. But when I asked which cabin he was in, he hesitated. Then he smiled faintly and said, "Not far from yours, I think." He didn't give a number. That night, I saw him again, this time in the theater, sitting 2 rows behind me. After the show, he walked with me to the lounge. He seemed to know the ship well, guiding me through hallways without hesitation. By the third day, I realized something strange. I saw Daniel everywhere, on the pool deck in the morning, watching the waves. In the buffet line at lunch, chatting with the staff. In the casino at night, standing near the tables but never gambling. Always there, always polite, always smiling faintly when our eyes met. It wasn't just me. Other passengers spoke to him too. I saw him shaking hands with couples, making small talk with families. He was friendly, approachable, the kind of man people remembered. And yet, there was something off. Because no matter how many times I saw him, no matter what we talked about, I realized I didn't actually know anything about him at all. Where was his cabin? Who was he traveling with? Why did he never seem to eat more than a few bites, or drink more than a sip? And why, whenever I looked away for even a moment, did he sometimes vanish into thin air? On the fourth night, I couldn't sleep. I left my cabin around 2:30 in the morning, hoping a walk on deck might calm me. The ship was quiet, most passengers asleep, the hallways dim and hushed. I took the stairs up to the observation deck, and there he was, Daniel, standing alone by the railing, staring out at the sea the same way he had that first evening. His posture was the same, his stillness unsettling. He didn't turn until I was nearly beside him. "You're awake too," he said softly. His tone made it sound less like a question and more like an expectation. I asked him what he was doing up at this hour. He smiled faintly, that same half-smile I was starting to know too well. The ocean doesn't sleep. Sometimes it whispers things you can't hear in daylight. It sent a chill through me. The next morning he was at breakfast again, just as calm, just as composed, as if the night before hadn't happened. By now I was actively looking for him, and I always found him. In the library, leafing through books he never borrowed, in the theater before the lights dimmed, in the casino, watching but never playing. Always there. But something about his presence was beginning to gnaw at me. The way he seemed to know exactly where I would be. The way he appeared in places impossibly fast, sometimes ahead of me even when I'd just seen him elsewhere. And then there were the details. His clothes never changed. The same neat button-down, the same dark slacks, the same polished shoes. Day after day, night after night. At first I thought I hadn't noticed, but as the days passed, the sameness became impossible to ignore. And his drink? Always whiskey. Always in hand, though I never saw him actually drink it. The glass remained full, the ice unmelted. No matter how long it sat, I started asking around. A couple I'd chatted with said they'd spoken to him by the pool. A family said he'd helped their child pick up a dropped toy in the dining hall. Everyone remembered him. Everyone liked him. But when I asked, which cabin is he in, the answers grew vague. Somewhere near ours, I think. On deck B, maybe? Not sure. He never said. No one knew. By the end of the week, my curiosity turned into obsession. I decided I'd follow him just once to see where he went. That night, after dinner, I spotted him leaving the lounge. I kept my distance, trailing him through the corridors. He walked slowly, deliberately, never looking back. I followed him past the casino, down a narrow hallway, past a service door, and then he turned a corner. I hurried after him, but when I turned that same corner, the hallway was empty. No doors, no rooms, nowhere he could have gone. He had simply vanished. My heart hammered as I stood there, alone, the hum of the ship's engines filling the silence. And for the first time since I'd met him, I felt it clearly. Daniel wasn't just another passenger. Something about him was wrong. Very wrong. The next morning, I went straight to the reception desk. I tried to keep my voice calm, but I could feel the tremor in it. "There's a man on board. His name's Daniel. He's everywhere. Can you tell me which cabin he's in?" The woman behind the counter smiled politely. She typed into her computer, her nails clicking against the keys. A moment later, her expression shifted. Confusion first, then discomfort. She checked again. Then she looked up at me, her smile thinner now. "I'm sorry, sir. There's no passenger by that name on this ship." I felt my stomach drop. That can't be right. I've spoken to him every day. So have other passengers. She shook her head. "Our records are very precise. If he isn't listed, he isn't here." I left, rattled. But part of me clung to hope. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe Daniel had booked under a different name. Maybe that evening at dinner, I asked around casually. The couple at my table nodded eagerly when I mentioned him. "Oh yes, Daniel. Very polite man. We saw him in the lounge last night. He even recommended a drink to me." The family I'd met earlier agreed too. "He's always so kind," the mother said. "He told us stories about his travels. Said he'd been on ships like this for years." Everyone remembered him. Everyone described him the same way. Calm, friendly, always watching the sea. But when I pressed them, "Do you know which cabin he's in?" the answers were the same vague shrugs. "Not sure." He didn't say. "Somewhere near yours, I think." That night, I found him again on deck. He was waiting, almost like he knew I'd come. He turned as I approached, that faint smile tugging at his lips. "You've been asking about me." My chest tightened. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Why can't anyone tell me your cabin number? Why isn't your name on the passenger list?" He chuckled softly, but there was no warmth in it. "Lists don't matter. Numbers don't matter. Not here." He sipped his whiskey, or at least pretended to. The glass stayed full, the ice stayed frozen. "Where do you go at night?" I pressed. "I followed you. You just disappeared." He leaned closer, his eyes sharper now, his voice low. "The ship keeps secrets. Some people see them, most don't." For the first time since I'd met him, I felt real fear. There was something in his gaze, not menace exactly, but inevitability, as if he knew something about me that I didn't. When I turned away for a moment, just to steady myself, he was gone. The next morning, I confronted reception again. I demanded to speak to the purser. After a long wait, a stern man appeared, his tone clipped. "Sir, I've checked the manifest myself. No one named Daniel is aboard. If you continue to harass other guests about this, we'll have to take action." But as he spoke, I noticed something, a flicker in his eyes, a hesitation in his voice, like he wasn't telling me the whole truth. Later that day, one of the stewards pulled me aside quietly. His voice trembled. "Don't ask about him anymore," he whispered. "We've had others, passengers who swear they see him. Always the same man, always the same name. But he's not on the list. He's never on the list." He looked around nervously before adding, "Some say he's been on this ship for decades." I froze, my mouth dry. What happened to them? The others who saw him? The steward's face paled. They stopped asking questions. He stepped back quickly and hurried away, refusing to say more. That night, I found Daniel again. But this time, he wasn't smiling. This time, he was standing directly outside my cabin. And when I froze in the hallway, too terrified to move, he tilted his head and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "You've seen me now. That means you'll never leave." I froze outside my cabin, heart pounding, staring at him. Daniel stood perfectly still, his face calm, expressionless, but his presence heavy. Like the air around him was thicker, harder to breathe. "What do you want?" I whispered. He smiled faintly, that same unsettling half smile. "It's not about what I want. It's about what the ship wants." Before I could answer, he turned and stepped through my cabin door without unlocking it, without opening it. He simply passed through as if the door weren't even there. My blood ran cold. Shaking, I forced myself inside. My room was empty, my bed neatly made, my belongings untouched. No sign of him, but on the desk, there was something new. A glass of whiskey, ice unmelted. I stumbled back out into the hallway, panic rising. I went straight to reception, demanding security. They sent 2 officers with me, their expressions skeptical but stern. When we opened my cabin together, it was spotless. No whiskey glass. No trace of him at all. One of the officers gave me a long, hard look. "Sir, this is your only warning. Stop spreading stories about imaginary passengers, or we'll have to confine you for the remainder of the voyage." Imaginary. That's what they thought. That's what they wanted me to think. But I knew better. That night, I locked my door, double-bolted it, and sat awake with the lights on. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., I heard the knock. 3 times. Slow. Deliberate. Not from outside the door this time. From inside the cabin. I turned, breath caught in my throat. And there he was, sitting in the chair by the desk. Calm. Silent. Watching me. The same faint smile on his lips. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The room felt smaller, closing in around us. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "You understand now. I never checked in because I never checked out." And then, he was gone. The chair empty. The glass of whiskey still full. The air cold as ice. When the ship docked days later, I was one of the first to leave. I practically ran down the gangway, desperate to escape. But before I reached the terminal, I glanced back, and there he was, on the deck, leaning against the railing, watching me go. I turned away quickly, refusing to look again. I don't know what Daniel is. A ghost. A memory. Something the sea itself refuses to release. But I do know this. Passengers will keep seeing him. They'll talk to him, share drinks with him, even laugh at his stories. And when the ship docks, they'll find out the truth. Daniel isn't on the list. He never is. But he'll always be on the ship. And if you think that's terrifying, wait until you hear about the storm that came from nowhere. A storm that swallowed a cruise ship whole, raged for days, and never appeared on any weather map. The storm that never ends.